Hi, welcome back to the Spirit Lounge and on to our onward journey through many different scriptures and texts and religious books, if you like, and philosophies in this world to take us through the journey of gnosis towards our own spiritual expansion and ascent through the various states of expansion towards the divine grace in which we're all trying to seek. Now let's just turn the camera. So I hope this is we're moving into what is called the Vedic Upanishads, and I'm going to go straight into that now and give you some history on what the Upanishads actually are before we delve right into the texts. They are written in Sanskrit and they are translated from Sanskrit, so I'll give you the translations only. Not today, probably in a couple of videos we'll jump into it, but there are a lot of precursor information that you need to absorb before we get into the Upanishads, because it can be a bit complicated because it's very, very esoteric and metaphysical in nature, and it does use a lot of words that often come up, so it's good to get a grasp of some of the history and the background before we jump into that. So this is what this video is going to be covering. You'll start to recover, there will be a couple more. So let's go straight into this. Okay, the Nag Hammadi, not the Nag Hammadi, this is not correct, and I apologize for that oversight. I'm just going to quickly delete that. Yeah, that wasn't too clever. Okay, sorry about that, and bring that back up onto the screen properly. There you go. So this is actually the Upanishads and the history of them. Okay, so the book I'm using, similar to the Gnostic texts I used, the book I'm going through is the Principal Upanishads, who were written by Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, who was actually, interesting enough, second president of India. He was born on 5th of September 1888. He was a statesman and a scholar, and he started to study the Upanishads and Sanskrit texts, and he wrote this book. Had a large preface and a lot of history behind it, and he translated the Sanskrit text, and this is the book. It's 1,000 pages of text, so you can imagine how long this journey may be, but I'll try to condense it as much as I can. And it's a belief system that underpins Hinduism. It didn't come after Hinduism. It's a preceding philosophy. It's very much a spiritual philosophy, very much an esoteric, metaphysical philosophy. It's a way of life. It doesn't actually concentrate on any single being as such, and it's a belief system. In other words, a way of life. And it's believed that the ancient works reveal the truth of ultimate reality. So, and a path to moksha or salvation. There are more than 200 Upanishads, so there's 200 different subtexts within what's called the Upanishads, and I'll just show you the book actually while I can, see if you can see that. So this is the actual book. It's this thick, and this is what we're going to be traveling and traversing together. And it's a large body of religious texts, in other words, from ancient India. It's composed in Sanskrit text, which is the oldest layer of literature, and it bases the form of Hinduism. The Upanishads are what's called a late Vedic Sanskrit text. In other words, they were the last text to be written. There are other Vedic scripts out that are also exist, and we'll go through what they are. And they're a religious teaching. The Upanishads are the final. They're the religious teaching as scriptures of the complete what we call Vedas. And the idea is that's still incorporated within Hinduism, although Hinduism has morphed into much more of a religion with other rituals than they're not. So let's move into some of this. So what are the Vedas? The main focus of the four Vedas. So there's four Vedas in total. One is the Rig Veda, which contains hymns. So the first four are not talking about spiritual enlightenment or a way of life. They are more ritualistic and other mythology and hymns, like psalms, for example, and poems and passages like that. So the Rig Veda is the most famous one. It contains hymns and the mythology around those hymns. The Sam Veda consists mainly hymns and about rituals. The Yajur Veda contains instructions for religious rituals, and the Atharva Veda, which contains spells against enemies, sorcerers, and diseases. We're not going to go through any of them, but those are the four main Vedic texts that are out there. They can be read. They have been translated from Sanskrit if you're interested in reading those, but we're not going to go through those. It will take an age to cover all of these. The one we are going to be looking at is the Upanishads, and it played an important role. It was called the last Veda. It was the late one. In other words, it was the one written after all the other four, and it concentrated more on the role of spiritual development, on the ascent towards the divine all. And that is where we're most interested in, rather than the mythology, the hymns, the rituals, and these other instructions and spells and things like that. So it's a development of spiritual ideas in ancient India, marking a transition from Vedic ritualism to new ideas and institutions. So it moved from the four initial Vedas into what was called the spiritual enlightenment side of things, which is what we're more interested in. The main focus was spiritual enlightenment and spiritual development, and Hinduism was defined upon the Vedas and the Upanishads. So aspects of it came into Hindu religion. Many belief systems. So it's way older than the Gnostic texts, way older than the Bible, and many other texts. I've written these down here. So it believes that Hinduism was started around circa 2300 BC, and around the Indus Valley, and then it spread out actually, and it morphed out in 1500 BC. And some say it actually existed within the Harappan civilization in circa 4,500 or 5,000 BC. Very earlier civilizations practiced the very early forms of Hinduism back then. Now, in contrast, Judaism was said to be about 2,000 years BC, originated around, or written, or formed, or created around 2000 BC. Zoroastrianism, which is 1500 or 2000 BC, around the same time. The Buddhist origin was 500 BC. So Buddhism was actually manifest out of Hinduism, actually, and it takes a lot of the Vedic principles into Buddhism. And we'll be going into Buddhism later in the future. Gnosticism again was the post crucifixion, so it's 200 BC to 400 AD. So some of the texts were before, and then most of them were written together and compiled in what was called the Gnostic texts around 400 AD. And Islam again was followed around 610 AD. So this gives you some kind of chronology around how some of these other texts and belief systems were formed and how old some of them are. And Hinduism, one of the oldest in the world. If we look at some of the dates, it could be the oldest, but this is a debate for those who are interested in debating how old things may be. Okay, so I took this text from this link here, so if you guys want to look at that, you can. But it gives you the difference between the four texts that we talked about, that I've mentioned before, called the Vedic four texts, and the Upanishads. And it just gives you some contrast around when they were formed, what they were about, and the leanings of those texts. So the Vedas were composed over a period of time, so it's much older than the Upanishads. So it's about 1200 to 400 BC. And there were, as I said, and the Upanishads were around 700 to 400 BC. So they came after. They were the latest written texts. The Vedas focus on ritualistic details, uses, traditions, hymns, those kind of things, where the Upanishads focus on spiritual enlightenment, i.e. the passage of ourselves into our true I and therefore to the divine all itself. Vedas means knowledge in Sanskrit. It also, Upanishads means, or is also known as apurusaya, which is meaning not of man. So it's knowledge that is beyond man, outside of man. It is or outside of humanity, the physical side of ourselves. It's the gnosis, like the Gnostic text was saying. It's gnosis that comes from the passage of spiritual scent. It's the unveiling of greater knowledge. Therefore, it is called knowledge. In Vedas means knowledge in Sanskrit, and apuresa means not of man. Upanishads, on the other hand, means to sit near. It's to sit near or to sit upon. Is derived from the words upa, which is near, and shad, which is to sit near. And that means basically to sit near knowledge, to sit near the conduit or the passage or the funnel in which that knowledge is going to be revealed to you. The enlightenment is going to be revealed to you. So this is often at the side of the feet of a teacher. So this is where the concept of gurus came from India, where gurus were teachers. Sadhus were teachers, where often many went to understand spiritual enlightenment, to go through spiritual enlightenment as it was defined through Vedic principles, practices, and Hinduism in general, which is much more of a spiritual, metaphysical than concentrating on a singular being, such as Jesus or other avatars like that. This is more holistic, but it does have many deities, which we'll probably maybe touch on. But the Upanishads doesn't have so many in there, from what I recall from touching on it some time back. There are 4 different Vedas: Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Raju Veda, and Atharva Veda. And in Upanishads, there are 200 various texts within Upanishads. I think they're in this book, so we'll be going through those. So each Upanishad is associated with each Veda. So there are chapters in here which says Upanishads associated with Rig Veda, Upanishads associated with Sama Veda, and so on and so forth. So there are chapters in this book. I've seen them. We will be going through those. There are 14 which are in this book, which are the most well known, and those are listed here just for reference. And all 4 Vedas are compositions of different texts. So all of these Vedas, just like the Gnostic compilations, were a composition of texts from various sources, various what we call ascetics that were alive at the time when the Vedas were formed. They all sat in meditative practice, all sat in and did yoga practice and principles, not the yoga you see in the more commercial outlets over in the West, but the original source of yoga, which was more controlling breath and being still, doing posture, and also meditative silence and practice, and receiving divine gnosis that way. And those were all formed into what was compiled into these 4 Vedas. Very similar to Gnostic texts, which are taken from many different Valentianism and so forth. They were taken in from Gnosticism, Valentianism, and other philosophies that were brought together as Gnostic texts. The Vedas had a very similar form. They were taken from various ascetics who received knowledge and then created these Vedas, and also were inputting into the Upanishads, which were the last writings of the Vedas. So they were the last section of any Vedas. Upanishads are a subcategory of the Veda. In other words, they're a spiritual enlightenment component part of the Vedas, or the 5th or the last text. So the Vedas are into 4 major text types: mantras, rituals, sacrifices, some explanation of sacred knowledge, scientific knowledge, i.e. the creation of the universe, how old the universe is. In my book, I've actually stated how ancient India calculated the age of the universe, the cosmos itself. Very old in their calculation. You can have a look at the book if you buy that, and you'll see it, or you can just look online at the calculation. It's there. The Upanishads, on the other hand, are more about spiritual knowledge and philosophy, as we've mentioned before. It originated from each branch, so each branch of these, the 4 Vedas, it took from them and created spiritual enlightenment and knowledge through that. And it deals with the philosophical aspects of life. It's a way of life. It's not worshipping a single deity or a form. It's asking an individual to practice the ascent from within, to become it. In prayer is where we speak to the divine, and in silence and meditation is where we hear and we listen to the divine, and we sit in silence. You don't have to sit in any postures or anything. This is, if you're into those kind of things, you can just sit silently on a chair or upright in bed. So those are the main differences there. So you can see what they are, and I thought that was quite interesting. So you can look at this link if you're interested in reading a bit more. Okay, so the Vedas and Upanishads spread through Tibet, Nepal, China, East Asia, South Asia, Central Asia. It went outward, and it was also the basis of Buddhism later on. And it pursues human thought and a metaphysical approach to divine. It's very, very metaphysical, very esoteric. Other metaphysical components of religion, so the Judaism, it's called the Kabbalists, the Sufis. Sufism was a Persian aspect of it. Gnosticism was a Christian metaphysical side. So all religions, formal religions, will have a metaphysical or a spiritual, metaphysical, esoteric practice alongside it. There is the dogmatic doctrine, and then there will be a metaphysical practice alongside it. And these are just a list of some. There are many. If you look online, you'll see many of the other main religions out there will have metaphysical practices and approaches outside of the main doctrine that they pervade. And within Hinduism, you can call the Upanishads or the Vedas as the metaphysical side of things. And it refers to the divine as an unseen reality. It talks about light on human existence. It talks about there is no other repose, which means there is no other state but being in the absolute. The absolute is what is referred to as the divine all, or the invisible spirit, or the triple-powered male in Gnosticism, if we recall that, the diagram we went through there. There is no rest except in the divine. So this is talking about rest. Remember, rest is a common term. It was in the Gnostic text as well. You come to rest when you, in contemplation, in silence, contentment, peace and harmony. When you're in the divine state, Tifera is the same thing. Moksha is the same thing. It's talking about ultimate rest within a divine Christ consciousness, Krishna consciousness state. Ultimate rest is in perfect knowledge. This is interesting, perfect knowledge. This is just some, by the way, this is not the Upanishads. This is some background to what the Upanishads are going to be articulating, because it can get, the translation of the Sanskrit gets complicated. It's not altogether very clear. So it's good to understand some of these aspects beforehand, so you can overlay the understanding of what's coming with some of this understanding of what they may mean if it's not clear to you. And behind, within and beyond the passing flux of the universe, so this is saying that the divine is in all things. And it's beyond the reach of possession is the final good. In other words, the final ascent is possession, the release from rebirth, in other words, which is what's called moksha. And Upanishads help us rise above the fleshy life, which is self-apparent. And again, Upanishads means to sit down near to, which is what a spiritual guru or a sadhu or a seer would say. A sadhu is a religious ascetic in India, to learn secret doctrine. In other words, secret doctrine isn't secret. It's something that we have yet to unveil from within ourselves. It's secret to us, individually one-to-one, because we're just not aware of it, because we haven't taken or we haven't embarked upon the passage to reveal it to ourselves. And then it's no longer a secret. We are merely just opening the book of divine knowledge and knowing to ourselves. Remember, gnosis is knowledge. Knowledge comes from a metaphorical, energetic book that releases as we traverse the passage towards ascent to different states which is what all of these energy bodies are talking about. Upanishads contains the meanings of Om. So Om is, some people may recognize this as Om, which has to be said from the chest. It needs to vibrate through the body. Is often practiced in meditation or those practices. I actually have that around my neck. This symbol here is the Om symbol, which I have around my neck, and I've worn it most of my life. It's just something that I connect with, not for any religious reason. It resonates very deeply for me, and I never take it off. But that's what it means. It basically means a symbol of the universal ultimate reality. In other words, the divine. I call it is the sound. The sound Om is the hum of the divine universe. The sound of all that is, that vibrates through everything that exists. It's also called Tajalan, which is reality, or Brahma. Brahma meaning the highest principle. When you reach Brahma, it's the highest principle. You're reaching the highest principle of gnosis, of knowledge of Ascent. Also Rahasyam, which is mysteries, which is releasing mysteries. Mysteries are, again, secret doctrine, if you like. The mysteries of the universe, mysteries of the divine, mysteries of ourselves, mysteries of how we ascend, and so forth. To a tested few. Remember in the Gnostics, it's repeated in the Upanishads. To not pass on knowledge to those who are not ready to hear, but only to those who are worthy. This just simply means those who are on the passage of the divine who will understand it, but do not waste your words on those who do not understand, are not on the path, and who will simply mock. So it doesn't mean you have to, it's just not talking about keeping it to yourself. It's really talking about the tested few are those who are traversing the passage and becoming that journey, not just practicing it through ritual. And some more here. So the Upanishads is a doctrine. I took this out of the book as well. It's a doctrine of Brahma, which is the ultimate principle, may be imparted by a father to his elder son or to a trusted pupil, but not to another, whoever he may be, even if the latter should give him the whole earth filled with treasures. So this is effectively saying, only impart knowledge. Just as the Gnostic text was saying over and over again, you'll find the same messages in all of these texts. I repeat this because I need to ensure that we all understand as we pass through all these passages and these texts and scriptures that the messages are very, very similar. There is no prejudice there should be no prejudice to what you're reading. It's just another stone of gnosis that needs to be absorbed. We need to understand all that is. To understand all that is, we need to absorb all that is and understand all that is without prejudice, without indoctrination. With open heart and spirit is how gnosis evolves. We have to allow gnosis to evolve and release from ourselves. We cannot do that if we restrict. Now this is, again, talking about what we just talked about. This is saying, do not give to anyone, even if they offer you the world, in short. Upanisads means Brahma knowledge, which means the ultimate reality. Like what we mentioned before on the previous slide, Brahma means the highest universal principle. Ignorance is loosened or destroyed. Upanishads have grown over time from various texts, and these are some of those texts, and I won't go into reading all of those out. There may be others among to 108. Sometimes it mentions there are 108 texts that constitute the Upanishads. That may well be, but these constitute just some of them. Most early literature is anonymous, so again, it was from various ascetic sources, from various pieces of gnosis that was discovered by various ascetics brought together in the Vedas. Similar to the Gnostic text. And some sages here, Aruni, Yajnavalkya and Balaki, Savateku, Sandilya, and others. I can hardly pronounce some of these. Upanishads also referred to as Sruti, which is what is heard. The reason I'm saying these, I'm giving you these because you may hear them again. And I will explain them every time we hear them, but I just want to introduce you to some of the Sanskrit words today, because they may come up over and over again as we go through the Upanishads. and it's breathed by God and visioned by the seers. So this is talking about the ascetics who sat in meditation, or the seers, or the gurus who sat in meditative practice and in prayer, in silence, and the knowledge and gnosis was breathed into them. It's not really breathed into them. They've allowed the divine to unveil it through them because it's already within us. I am a proponent of that. Within us all, our spirit is all divine knowledge. Access to the divine exists within the divine breath within us. We just need to allow that spirit to unveil it to our conscious selves so that we can start to become that in our physical manifested life. So it's already here. The divine is waiting for us to release it from within here, from ourselves, and to become. And through that is what's called ascent. And through that gnosis is the ascent to grace. Fullness of their illuminated experience is not reached by ordinary perception, inference, or reflection. This, for me, is mind, intellectual, ego, and discourse. Okay, so remember we talked about many times when we went through the Gnostic texts, we talked about these energy bodies and subtle bodies and so forth. They talk about the lower spectrum being the mind body. The intellectual discourse and perception, inference, and reflection is here. It's in the mind. Your spiritual ascent will not come through your mind. It will all come through your heart and spiritual center. This is where it will come from. It will be processed and received and understood through thought, through the mind, but it isn't the receiver. It's not the originating force. This is what this is saying. Revealed to them without effort, an independent reality which impinges on his consciousness. Direct disclosure from the holy other. A revelation of the divine. Is a God blowing on us sacred knowledge, blowing on us from within us, ascension, blowing on us awakening, blowing upon us a growth and expansion. The breath which quickens, a seed which fertilizes, or a flame which kindles the human spirit to its finest. This means we become integrated with that spirit in form. The spirit is also always at its finest, but we become connected with it and we become at our finest. Truth is impersonal, which is true. It's what's called apurusheya, which in Sanskrit means not of man or authorless. And the journey, the truth of the divine is not personal, but your individual journey is personal. It's your own unique passage, but the truth is not personal, it's impersonal, it's for all. Its inspiration is a joint activity. That means it's you and your relationship and reacquaintance with your divine force and your spirit and the divine Father or grace of all. One of the sages, one of the ascetics, now I don't know if this ascetic was actually a contributor to the Vedas or not, but one of the ascetics, Sarvepalli saw the truth owing to his power of contemplation. So here, another one, ascetic, a sadhu sat in meditative silence and the grace of God, which is tapa pravada and deva prasada. Knowledge is a means of freedom, the pursuit of wisdom by a way of life. So the Upanishads is a way of life, in other words. It's silence. That's why you find many ascetics in India, those who are revered, often hiding away in Nepalese or Himalaya mountains, in caves. They live away from each other. They have no possessions. They are fed by the community, clothed by the community, given water. They spend their time in isolation, meditating and in practice. And these are the ascetics of the ages gone past, who have contributed to these writings. Okay, the Upanishads are the Vendata. What the Vendata means is the end. So I think I've actually stated this somewhere. I may have missed it, possibly missed it. But what Upanishads, the Upanishads as the Vendata. Vendata means the end. In other words, so it's talking about the Upanishads as the last writing, the writing at the end of the Vedas. The Vendata meant originally the Upanishads, which was basically, Vedanta means the end or the conclusion of. The goal of the Vedas, it was the goal of the Vedas. In other words, the four Vedas had a goal and a conclusion, and they were summarized in what was called the Vedanta or the Upanishads, another name for it. They come at the end of the Vedic period. Upanishads contain truths which is difficult to understand, discussions of ultimate philosophical problems. They are a little bit difficult to understand. I'll do my best to interpret them to the best of my ability and using my own internal knowing and channel. But some of them are convoluted, and so just reading them straight off the bat, just like some of the Gnostic texts, because there's so much of the Gnostic text missing. Trying to understand what a passage means when a third of it is missing is sometimes difficult as well. They represent the central aim and meaning of the teaching of the Vedas, the Vedanta, Vijnanam, the wisdom of the Vedanta. Upanishads represent the Jnana Kanda, or knowledge portion of the Vedas, which we've talked about, is the life of the spirit, or our apprehensions of life of spirit and symbols to it. Upanishads are not the thought of a single philosopher, so allow variety of interpretation. They're interpreted by the reader, they're interpreted by your state of frequency, so you may take a different interpretation from what I pass on to what I'm interpreting it to be for you on my videos. And they are from many, many sources. They are teachings of the thinkers or ascetics, as we discussed. There is fluidity in their thought, which has been utilized for the development of different philosophical systems. So I think they also contributed, again, obviously to Hinduism, but to Buddhism, but also went to East and contributed to maybe Taoism or other faiths around that time as well that exist today. Upanishads do not work out a logically coherent system of metaphysics, but it still has some deities in there. This also refers to, in the Gnostics they had many eonic states. They had the Barbelo eon, then they had the luminaries and eons below, then they had the sub-eons and Sophia, then we had the demiurge, then we had all the archons, then we had other eons talking about baptism, and there were a myriad of eonic structures. The Upanishads don't have that. It's much more of a fluid, non-structural practice, a way of life. It's very much about silence and meditation and revealing the divine from within yourself through speaking to the silence, speaking to it in prayer, and receiving knowledge in silence and meditation. It's very much, like I said, it's a personal practice, but it's an impersonal truth. So that's the differences between it. There is no single deity to focus on. It's really about uncovering self through self. It gives us a few fundamental practices or doctrines. The Brahma Sutra is sometimes seen as a consolidated view of the Vedanta. The reality is Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, or Atman, which is the spiritual life principle of the universe. You'll hear these words as well. So Brahman means ultimate reality, and Atman means spiritual life principle of the universe, or different meanings close to that. Brahman is free from all duality. Yep, as we mentioned, the ultimate reality has no duality. The ultimate reality is basically the divine realm, the source of us all, the divine Father, the grace, the Godhead. Doesn't have duality. Remember, duality was created by us through aspects of the dichotomy of free will, which we'd explained in the previous video of body, soul, and spirit. We have free will. The further we move away from grace in our actions, words, thoughts, and intentions, the more brutal duality becomes, because we feed duality. Duality is opposite. It's negative, positive, love and hate, grace and light and dark, grace and non-grace, if you like. Couldn't think of the word. But that's what duality really is. Everything was formed from love. We are supposed to maintain love and aspects of that to keep our vibration towards the divine Brahman, if you like. But that is not where we are. Life, ourselves, and this universe, all aspects of life, the billions of life forms that exist outside of us, beyond humanity, have all either gone along the spectrum of expression, this realm of stream of infinite possibility and free will. and probability. And within that, we've created decisions, action, words, thoughts, intentions, and created different expressions away from love. Some very, very opposing factors of love, which are the demonic, the satanic, the demonic, the serpent energy, if you like. And there's many in between. This all creates duality. So this is present in the universe, but not in the divine realm, or the source realm to which we are all trying to return to, which is what all of these scriptures, whether the Vedas, Gnostics, whether it be Kabbalism, whether it be Judaism, Zoroastrianism, or anything else, they all talk about the same thing. It's the same path. The saving truth which redeems the individual from the stream of births and deaths is the recognition of his own identity with the Supreme. This is talking about the release from rebirth. So autogenes was what the Gnostics called it. Moksha is what Hinduism or the Upanishads refer to it as. It's the release from rebirth. This is the state of ascent, whilst the state of ascent one can reach when one's in the body. This is in the Gnosticism is moving through all those eonic states, absorbing all of the aspects which each of the archetypes represented. In the Upanishads, this means the gradual unveiling of gnosis from within through silence, meditation, practice, and prayer. The multiplicity or plurality of the universe, this is talking about the many aspects, the diversions, the distractions that we have, the multiplicity, the plurality of the universe. The unending stream of life is real, but as a phenomenon. There is only unity within the one, and that is what this is describing. And this is explained. I'm giving this history because it explains a lot about what the Upanishads are about and some of the history behind it. Okay, the philosopher in 1077 AD stated that Ramanuja, which is a philosopher, said non-dual philosophy so as to make the personal God supreme. Brahman souls and the world are different and eternal, same time inseparable. While God exists for himself, matter and souls exist for his sake, subserve his purpose. So this is talking about while everything seems separate, it is all together and inseparable. And souls exist for the sake of the divine, to subserve, i.e. for his purpose. I don't quite, and the reason I put this down is because I don't agree in total with this. We are here as an aspect of the divine. The breath within us is divine. It was put there. It was a breath. The spiritual force is a thought expression. We're thought into being, in other words. We're not here to do we're not here to service the will of a divine Father. It doesn't direct us in our actions, words, thoughts. We are here to expressions of it so it can understand itself. But we are responsible and accountable for ourselves. And we're also accountable and responsible for our journey back to the vibration that is the Divine One. So yes, we are here for his sake, i.e. because of, but we're not here because God wills every aspect of our lives and has dictated our fates. That is not true. Our projection through life is our accountable and responsible nature. We own it. The divine just wishes to live so it can express from all life in this universe itself through the expression of us in this universe, the countless and limitless expressions of what life can become. So the divine knows itself, knows its infiniteness through everything else that exists through every action, word, and thought, and that includes darkness. It includes light, because that is all possibility and all probability. It's actually expected to happen. Duality is expected to be real, to be manifest, because free will implies that duality is manifest. It implies that darkness is created. It implies that all the spectrums of light and dark are expressed within this universe, because it's a universe of free will, of a stream of infinite possibility and probability, so that the divine can understand itself through all that exists. So the fact that duality exists and light and dark exists is an expected outcome of all that exists. The challenge for all that exists was that how much of that duality were we going to create? Well, I believe we've created all spectrums of it as humans. Now it's time for us to move towards the Divine Father, so that we can create a universe in which is a love vibration predominantly, and isn't given to the few who wish to govern and rule through darker practices and so forth. So that's going into other realms and around rabbit hole. We won't go into that. Okay, Brahma is the offspring, is the inspiring principle of the souls. Souls are different form, but not independent of God. Absolutely. The ideal is the enjoyment of freedom and bliss in the world of Narayana. Narayana is supreme being, who is the foundation of all men. Through thought, which is prapati, or bhakti, which is throwing oneself down on or devotional worship. In other words, giving oneself to devotional worship. That doesn't mean not living the material life. We are embodied to experience everything that this life can offer, and creating a life passage, a physical one. But to drive that through knowing oneself and throwing oneself into gnosis, not down. This is. I don't like this word, throwing oneself down. I did write that in there because that's what they put. But it's throwing oneself, or absorbing oneself into gnosis. Remember, you're never down. I don't use language that puts humanity or refers to us as lesser than anything, because there is no such thing. We have got to see ourselves as greater than what we identify. Okay, another ascetic called Madhva, which suggests 5 eternal distinctions. So there is there's the particle of matter and the others will go down from 5 on up. There's the soul and the other. There's the soul and matter. There's the God and matter. And then there's the God and the individual soul. This would be the nirvanic realm, I would say, between 2 and 3 would be nirvanic, or detachment from the matter and material realm, the moksha level. And these are the more ascended layers of God and individual souls, where matter doesn't exist. The Supreme Being possesses qualities of Vishnu, which is the preserver. So there are many. There is the preservation, the destruction, and creation elements of the universe. And Vishnu is the preserver, which are deities within Hinduism. Lakshmi, which is wealth and fertility. There are many. When we may go through those if they're not mentioned in the Upanishads book, because it's good to understand that as well, because the Gnostics had countless eons. What these deities are the same. You could call them archetypes, which eons are archetypes, and they represent something. And so these deities also are archetypes that represent something. Moksha is a release from rebirth. Human souls are innumerable. Divine souls are destined for salvation. This also talks about the revelation or salvation, the coming to rest. What were the Gnostics also talking about? The divine chamber, the bridal chamber, so to speak. Both are subject to samsara, which is a cycle of death and birth. So the souls, I think divine and soul is exactly the same thing. In here they're calling souls is the spirit. In I think the Upanishads refer to the spirit as souls. So when you hear that, think of it as a divine spirit. Without divine grace, there can be no salvation. Absolutely. Okay. So that is the end of the history and the background to some of the Upanishads. We are going to go into the next chapter in the next video that I produce. We won't be going directly into the Upanishads just yet, because there are a few chapters which go into the Upanishads with Rig Veda, the Upanishads to each of the 4 Vedas first, and then it goes into the actual translation of the Sanskrit texts themselves, which are having split up into small passages, and we'll go through those one by one. So it'll be quite a lengthy journey, so I hope you're ready for this. Remember, become what it is what you're learning in Gnostics, whether in my videos or anyone else's, or anything you read, anything you hear, anything you uncover from within yourself, because it's important to become that. This is what this throwing yourself into is all about, is not to just practice it with rituals. When often people go on to ascending passages or journeys, and they dip their toes in and out, and they do a prayer when they want something, or when something isn't going right in life. They do a ritual when they want something, or they'll ask the guru or an ascetic to perform a ritual for them, to give them luck for something. These things are implicit when you're on a real journey. You don't have to ask for rituals. You don't have to ask for practices from ascetics or gurus or sadhus or priests or rabbis, priests and popes, because being on a journey of ascent means that you're following your true path. Everyone's path is to follow the path back to grace whilst creating the physical experience in life. When you do that, the physical experience in life that you create is often one of much more ease, because that path is laid out to you, because it comes from a much more spiritual force. It becomes effortless, in other words. I will say that to you, not from theory. This is my own life. So I recall a time when it was about 10 years of time in my life past that I strayed away from what I do now and into different passages. I went completely away. I actually stopped praying. I didn't meditate. I forgot. I detached from the divine in my life. And my life for those 10 years became one of very much struggle and loss in all aspects, actually. And it took me to a point where the divine was forcing me to recall and remember. And so I did one day, as a private time, a path, and I remember it very, very distinctly. And from that moment, I requested support to come back. And I did. And ever since then, that very moment, from that day onwards, all the struggle and the loss and the need that I had disappeared. Everything seemed to be the path was effortlessly paved before me, because I had drifted away onto a cobbly road, onto a road with ditches, onto a road with holes, a passage which is through nettles and bushes, is one that I drifted into, and I was walking that for a decade. And then when I came back onto the one that existed, that was clear, had light upon it, the one that I was always supposed to stay on, it became effortless and ease. And everything that's manifested since then is because I've remained on the path, and the divine has laid that out for me, and I simply walk it. The service to myself is being through service and to others, which is what I do through this channel and teaching. So I know what I say is true. I don't say it through philosophy or because I've read it. Much of this I understand because I channel that, and I've been through these experiences myself when I've lost my way for a period of time in life, which was quite a long period of 10 years. And, we all have to forgive ourselves for some of these times when we stray away. The point is to always come back and try to remain on that journey at all times. And my faith is always with the divine. I don't worry about what I need to do. I just do it and seek guidance from that which is silent and continue on the path to go forward. So become this and this passage for yourselves. As Mahanji also states, it's transformative only if you become it. It's just a practice if it becomes a ritual. Okay, and if you're interested in the book there, this is I touch on some of this in that book. It's not into the depth that I go to on some of these videos. but it's a good. I wrote it as a foundation release for me. It may be interesting to you guys. It's not expensive, so if you are interested, buy it. But I don't want you to buy it because I need anything from it. It's just I put it out there as a foundational awareness of things that I talk about. And with that being said, I'll just put the webcam back on and say thank you for listening to this. It's going to be an exciting journey through the Upanishads. There are more chapters to come. There's got a lot of Sanskrit words thrown in here and there, so be ready to Google if they're not quite clear in my interpretation of some of those. I'm not sure my pronunciation. I apologize in advance for anything that I may say that is, so excuse me, my battery's running out, so I have to plug my charger into the laptop. If I pronounce any of this wrong, so I apologize for anyone who's going, oh, how can you pronounce that incorrectly? And he's of Indian descent. Well, that's not always an implicit meaning that I know I know how to pronounce every Sanskrit word. I don't. So accept my humility there, and I hope you appreciate our journey together. I'll say thank you all for your time today, and God bless until we speak again. Thank you.